Hey everyone, Caront here, and welcome to part 3 of my cancer story. In the last couple of episodes, we introduced everything, talked about how my cancer was discovered, and essentially talked about what that meant. So today, we're going to be looking at essentially me getting ready for chemotherapy. So basically picking up exactly where we left off. So I had, of course, found out that I had Hodgkin's lymphoma and didn't know exactly how far along things were. That was, of course, one of the things that we would determine during all this. So essentially, once I found out from the ear, nose, and throat doctor that the swollen lymph node that I'd had removed, that it had tested positive for Hodgkin's lymphoma, and once I figured out, hey, that's cancer, then the doctor basically said, okay, so now we're moving you over to oncology, which is essentially cancer treatment. And he told me, and I have gotten permission to mention names, that I would be seeing Dr. Olivia Hull, who was a relatively recent arrival here in town. And he's like, okay, so you're going to go see her. She's going to take care of you, etc., etc. So that essentially started moving things forward in that direction. This is probably, I think at this point, this is going into late July, probably early August at this point. So start making appointments, and I go to the cancer center in town. And I have said before about all the things that I feel like I was really fortunate about in my cancer journey. This is another one of them. And that is that, you'll hear stories sometimes about when people have to be treated for various and sundry disorders. They have to go to places like Emory in Atlanta or the Mayo Clinic or places like that. I was fortunate that there was a great cancer facility 5 to 10 minutes away from my apartment. Maybe 15 on a bad day traffic-wise. And that was the Spencer Cancer Center. It is a beautiful location. It's located a little ways away from the main hospital. So, I mean, it's fairly close, but it's not right on the same campus as the main hospital. It's a gorgeous building. Looks really nice. Everything is very clean. Everything is very, very modern looking, very sleek, beautiful. There's a small sort of walking area, kind of a nature area out in the back of the complex that you can walk around if you need to. It's a really nice place. So I liked that I didn't have to travel out of town to do my treatment, and that there was such a good place so close by. So again, things that I'm thankful for. So we get things ready to go there, and I, of course, wasn't really sure what was going on or what was going to happen. And so one of the main people who helped me out with all of this was my mom, who, once she found out that everything was going to start going sideways in regards to treatment and what have you, that she insisted on being here for all of it. And I don't want to talk too much about this now because I'm going to save that for another episode in greater sense. But suffice to say, Mom came for the initial consultation with Dr. Hull, just to essentially get an idea of who I was going to be with and what all was going to have to go into everything. So me and Mom are there. And so we go in, and of course, because COVID, yay, we had to wear masks and go through temperature checks and go through a list of, have you had this, and this symptom over the last 14 days. I joked with the nurses that felt like I was in the middle of a Pepto-Bismol commercial because of that list of symptoms, but everything was fine. They did all the checks they needed to with social distancing and whatnot because they are medical professionals and they know what they're doing. So we go in, we get ready for the consultation, and we meet with Dr. Hull for the first time. Dr. Hull was extremely energetic And exactly what I needed, because she is the sort of doctor who puts you at ease, with ease, frankly. And that was great, because I was sort of starting to really understand what was going to happen. And it was nice to have Dr. Hull there to reassure me. And also to have her assistant Jurgen there to assure me as well. Jurgen was also awesome as far as getting everything set up for appointments and times and all that good stuff. So definitely kudos to both. So we start meeting with Dr. Hull, and she went over in good detail everything that was going to happen. And essentially set out the program, set out what we were going to be looking for, set out whatever everything was going to be. And essentially what the lead-up process entailed in regards to getting ready for the treatment was we would have to, of course, first figure out the dimensions of what we were dealing with. And we knew that I had cancer, but we didn't know how aggressive it was. We didn't know how far it had gone. And that, of course, would decide how I was going to be treated, how we were going to go through treatment. Sorry, I keep using we, kind of slipping into the royal we a little bit, so forgive me. Anyway, so she outlines everything, and I'll probably refer back to that in bits and pieces in future episodes just to make a little more sense. But she outlines everything, and essentially, I think this was another step in me realizing, oh crap, this is what I'm dealing with, because she outlined the whole process of testing and treatment and follow-ups and such. And she mentioned it in the space of 5 years. And my first thought, admittedly, was, wait, we're going to be dealing with this for how long exactly? But that's mostly checkups, just FYI. So, yeah, like 5 years? What? So, she outlines everything. And the first step was to see just how far things had gotten. So, that meant, if I remember correctly, a PET scan. I get PET scan and CT scan mixed up, so forgive me. But essentially what it entailed was I had to come in, drink this not terribly tasty goop, to be honest. It was, I think I had the vanilla. They had vanilla or chocolate, one or the other. But basically what it was this goop, essentially. And it tasted okay. It wasn't great. I had to sip it over a space of about 45 minutes to be able to fully, to digest it, I guess. But it was this goop. And what it's used for is essentially you drink it, and it goes through you, pretty much, so that whenever they do the scan, it'll pretty much light you up like a Christmas tree, so that they can scan you and be able to see. Let's see, am I thinking? I might be thinking the wrong exam, actually. I don't know. I know that I had to do both types of exams. I had to do exams where I had, well, actually, I think this was part of it. Sorry, again, memories are a little blurry. So they did. So they gave me the goop that I had to drink, and it was over the space of about an hour. But before that, actually, to rewind a little, they injected me with a small radioactive isotope. So I joked that my theme song was Imagine Dragons Radioactive for that day. And that meant that I had to, that I had to be careful about who I contacted, like literally contacted, that day, because I was radioactive a little bit. So they inject you with a radioactive isotope. It's a small one. It's not a big deal at all. It was barely even any pain to it. But they inject you with this radioactive isotope so that it can go through your body and pretty much light you up. Then you drink the goop over the next hour so that it'll pretty much further light you up. The idea being that they would scan you and they would be able to see essentially where the cancer was. So they did all that, and it was obviously strapping me up to a few things and IVs and stuff like that, but it wasn't anything really onerous. It wasn't really stressful. The people there were all real nice about it. And, I'm the sort of person that I tend to allay my stress on those sorts of things with humor. So I was just joking back and forth with them, and everything was good. So they get the isotope in me, and I drink the goop over the space of an hour because they needed time for the isotope to go through me and all that jazz. And so after that, they took me back to the scan. And what that scan essentially entailed, and forgive me, I'm going to employ my chair a little bit here to demonstrate, is they get you in this machine, and it's not an MRI, it's not a magnetic scan, but they get you in this machine, they lean you back, and they make it to where you have to actually lean back with your arms back like this the whole time, so that you're pretty much literally stretched out about as far as you can get. And they got to do that so that, you don't get in the, so that your arms don't get in the way of the scanner. And you have to remove anything metallic or anything that might interfere with the imaging and what have you. So, you got to do the usual stuff. And so they get me in this machine and they set me up. And I think the scan was, about 20 minutes-ish. Something like that. So they take me through the scan. And honestly, I almost fell asleep while I was being scanned, because you have to, essentially, you just have to lie there for 20 minutes, and lying there with your arms kind of stretched out like this is not exactly the easiest thing ever. But the way that I went through it actually was to, and this is going to be complete nerdy of me, just fair warning, but I started envisioning myself running through, I think, a Final Fantasy IV free Enterprise seed, or a Final Fantasy randomizer seed, I forget which. But I basically started envisioning myself running through a seed. I go to, for Final Fantasy randomizer, I'd start in Canaria, pick up magic and weapons and armor and items, and then I'd go to the Temple of Fiends and beat up Garland, and then I'd come back, and then I'd go to Provoca, beat up the pirates, and go check Matoya's cave, and go down to Elfland, and the idea. You just run. I was just sitting here mentally running through a seed. And it worked. The 20 minutes just pretty much, boop, gone. Mostly, except the whole me almost falling asleep thing. So they go through, they do all that, and that was that. That was the whole process. And they said, okay, so we're going to get the results back to you in a couple of days. Okay, cool. So they come back with the results, and, well, they said, so we found the cancer in your neck. Well, my neck here, sorry, right side. And they're like, yeah, we found the cancer in your neck. Okay. But we also found something in your stomach, which was basically the oh bleep moment. Because here's the thing with cancer. If folks aren't aware of kind of how cancer works and how they categorize it. Basically, and I don't know the full details on this, so forgive me. Again, I'm not a medical professional in any stretch. But they categorize stages. You might hear stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. They categorize cancers according to how much they've developed and how far they've spread. Initially, what Dr. Hull had mentioned was that my cancer was stage 1, which meant that it was in the neck and only in that little bit of the neck. That's it. Whenever they found something in the scan in my stomach, however, that raised some pretty bushy eyebrows, because that potentially meant that I was stage 4. Stage 4, basically, if you hear anybody that says, they have stage 4 cancer, that's the real oh bleep moment, because that means that whatever cancer they have, whether it's breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer, whatever, it's metastasized. In other words, it's basically gotten so powerful that it's packed up and started moving all over your body. And so you don't just have it in, say, your lungs or your prostate or your stomach or whatever. You've got it a lot of other places too. That's stage 4. Probably, although not necessarily end of life. Because stage 4 can still be treated. Stage 4 can still be conquered. It's just really, really tough. So essentially, whenever they found that when it lit up in my stomach, that potentially could have elevated me from stage 1 to stage 4 just immediately. But it wasn't confirmed. So, okay, you need to have an endoscopy. Okay, what's an endoscopy? Because I had no clue. Basically, what an endoscopy was essentially, they take a camera, they put a camera down your throat. Don't worry, they knock you out for it. You're just, and then it happens. So, again, refer back to my previous video about how good I am with anesthesia. So, they put a camera down your throat so that they can take a look inside your stomach and see, at least in my stomach for me, and see what's going on. So, they do the endoscopy. I go to another surgery where they knock me out again, and they put a camera down my throat. The only thing that I really remember from that surgery is, I mean, the lead up, of course, nurses dressing me up and strapping me down and giving me IVs and giving me the knockout juice, and there I go. And then I woke up and my throat felt rough for the rest of the day, next day or so. So I get the endoscopy, and fortunately, the whole thing in my stomach was a dud. And Dr. Hull had mentioned in the lead up to it, because we're seeing each other like every 2 or 3 days at this point, because we got to get a lot of things ready for chemo. So she had mentioned beforehand, she kind of, whenever she found out about the whole light in my stomach thing, she was puzzled. And she consulted colleagues about it, and they were puzzled too, because this sort of thing never happened. And so she was optimistic that this was going to be a dud. And it was a dud, fortunately. So I was just stage 1. Whee! So I had the easy cancer, so to speak. So the endoscopy fortunately proved this, that my cancer was just in my neck. That's it. That we had caught it real nice and early, and so we could treat it accordingly. The main treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma is chemotherapy, as is the case for the majority of cancers. Not all of them, certainly, and there are definitely other treatments. There are more what you might think of as holistic treatments and such. Again, I'm not a medical professional, so I could not begin to tell you the details, but there are plenty of other treatments. But whenever we were discussing everything, Dr. Hull essentially sat us down and looked at me and said, okay, so the treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma hasn't changed in like 20 years because it works. Because the success rate is extremely high, somewhere in the neighborhood, and she quoted, for me being stage 1, she quoted me success figures at something like 95%, which is really good. So we knew going in, me and Mom and everybody else that I was keeping in the loop about this, that chemotherapy was going to be the treatment. So now that we had figured out that I was stage 1, and now that we had figured out that that whole stomach thing was fortunately just a dud, now of course it was time to get ready for the treatment itself. And that involved, of course, obviously getting ready for chemotherapy. So this involved a couple of things. And one of them is actually a visual aid that I meant to get for the video, that I meant to have sitting right here. So, and I totally forgot to do it. So forgive me. I'm actually going to mute the mic on my own video. I know, shame on me. And I'll probably edit the dead space, cut the dead space out just to make sure that y'all don't see it. But give me a second. Let me go grab the thing. Okay, so here's the thing that I meant to have as a visual aid for this presentation. This is the big honkin' folder of information that the folks at the Cancer Center prepared for, well, pretty much anybody, but that they had prepared for me in terms of what I jokingly called Chemo 101. Because whenever you start getting ready for chemotherapy, they have an entire orientation session for it. Because chemo's a big deal. In case y'all hadn't figured that out already. But yeah, so they set me down in this, I don't remember how long the meeting was. It was probably an hour or something like that. So they set me down for this meeting. And they're like, okay, so we need to get you ready for this. So I'm like, okay. So they give me this big old booklet here that described pretty much everything in detail as far as what I was to expect, as far as what it was going to entail in terms of the treatment and recovery and side effects and so on and so forth. And I'll probably talk more about some of that in the next video when we talk about my first chemotherapy session and kind of what all happened with it and how things transpired. So anyway, so they sit me down and they have this hour-long session and they give me this booklet and so on. And one of the things that I found interesting about it, aside from the whole glut of information, and it's a lot of information, they kind of just throw it all at you, but the fact, they do give you this in large part to help, to say, hey, if you want to look at it again or if you want to review it or what have you, here's the booklet. Here's the Big Fat Booklet. One thing that I found interesting, and that I was very grateful for, was without even needing to be prompted, without even really even talking about it, they said, hey, we're going to sign you up for financial assistance from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Like, okay. And so they did. They put my information in, and they got me a $500 grant from LLS, which was designed to help with, you know, the fact that you're going to be doing chemo for a while and you can't pay for things, so here you go. Which was really nice of them, and I didn't even ask about it. I wasn't even really thinking particularly about the money per se at that point. I was more just kind of like, wait, what's going on? But it was really nice that they just straight up, they just did it. And it wasn't a very long process. I had to fill out some information, but not a huge amount. And it didn't take forever to happen. I think within that hour, they put in the information and it was already done. Which I will also talk about that a bit more in a future video. Sorry, I'm sitting here trying to plan my thoughts. So we go through the whole chemotherapy, the Chemo 101 session, and I'm kind of walking away from it going, what am I getting myself into? But fortunately, you know, people were there to help me get ready, to help me deal with it. So they give me all this information about what chemo I'm going to be getting and what it's going to entail, and etc., etc. But then there's the physical aspect of it. And it wasn't just information, it was, hey, we got to get you ready to be able to take chemo. And what that ultimately meant was part of the reason why I am wearing a button-down, well, not a full button-down shirt, but a short-sleeved, buttony shirt today. And that is to show you probably the most important aspect of this whole process in terms of comfort and convenience and making sure this didn't go completely wrong with me. And that is, I don't know if y'all can see it, this little baby right here. This is what we call a port. And essentially, it runs a pipeline into one of my larger, I think, veins. I don't know if it's a vein or an artery. But it runs into one of my major blood vessels. And the idea being that essentially it could deliver the chemotherapy directly into my body, directly into my veins, without funky medical go-rounds. It was not very stressful to put in, fortunately, because it was another surgery and another, boom, I'm knocked out, and then suddenly I have this thing in me. Let me tell you, it was a godsend. The port is amazing. It has, from what I understand, revolutionized chemotherapy delivery and made it far, far better than it used to be. Because the main way that medical professionals had to install chemotherapy prior to the idea of a port was IV. And that has a lot more potential to go badly. And just depending on various issues with the patient with, with any number of things. Any number of things can go sideways with IV infusions of anything. And so it was much more dangerous. But the port that I had and have and will have probably for another few months yet made things much, much smoother. I was a little anxious about it, because it was a, hey, I've got this weird thing in my body now. And it took me a few days to get used to sleeping with it, because I'm a side sleeper. I kind of curl up like this. And so this thing was kind of poking into me the whole time. I was like, what do I do? But of course, right around the time that I start asking the surgical doctor, hey, how do you get used to sleeping with this thing? I figured out how to sleep with it. So go figure. Anyway, so we put the port in, and that was essentially the last step of getting ready. Because, we had figured out what I had. We'd figured out its severity. We had we'd taken care of a couple of ancillary issues with it. We had gotten educated, and we had basically gotten everything ready. So we're trying to plan everything out, getting everything set, and so we're meeting with Dr. Hull, and she said, okay, so we're going to start you on chemotherapy at the end of August, which was a teensy bit sooner than we had initially expected, but the sooner the better, because the sooner you start, the sooner you finish. So we were fine with that. And so that was that. So we had set chemotherapy for the end of August, and it would be my first official treatment for my cancer. So that's going to be the next episode. We're going to talk about what chemotherapy entailed, what sort of chemotherapy I got, what the whole process was, and what it did, what it meant, what it felt like. So that's going to be next time, because I want to, as usual, I want to save this for its own segment. So as always, of course, thank you guys for watching. Appreciate it as always. A special thank you to Jurgen and Dr. Hull for giving me permission to mention them in these videos, because I wanted to make sure I had permission before I mentioned them by name, so I definitely appreciate it. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully I will see you guys next time when we talk about chemo. And, well, I can't say it was fun, but definitely has its own stories to it. So, thanks. See y'all then.